This class is on deafness and disability and whether deafness is a disability or not. We would cover current discourse on deafness and disability, whether deaf people are disabled or do they consider themselves to be disabled. We'll talk about the medical, cultural, social, and political models of deafness. And we'll also question whether we should say deaf and disabled or whether we should talk about deaf people as not disabled at all. From the medical point of view, there's a picture of an ear inside. There are medical types of deafness according to what part of the ear is damaged. We can talk about sensory deafness. We can talk about neurological deafness if one of the nerves is damaged. We can talk about congenital deafness. As you can see, the ear can be divided into three parts: the outer, middle, and inner ear. Very often, if there is an impairment of the middle ear or inner ear, it can be fixed by, or not. Some of it can be fixed by using cochlear implants, and some of it can be fixed by using hearing aids. Now, a lot of deaf people consider themselves not to be disabled. They are considering themselves to be deaf by identity. So how do they choose their identity or identities? We can talk about linguistic and cultural identity when it comes to deafness. Some people consider themselves to be a language or cultural minority rather than a disability group. Lane, who is a big advocate for deaf people, suggests that deaf people are living in a deaf community with its own language. Here in the US, it is the American Sign Language. In other countries, it is a different sign language. And they also have their own culture. They live within a cultural frame in which to be deaf is not to be disabled, quite the contrary. It is an asset in deaf culture to be deaf in behavior, in values, in knowledge, and fluency in ASL. We can also talk about the deaf world. The medical model views disability as an individual problem. So it impacts the deaf community through the growth in audiology, speech therapy, cochlear implant surgery, and deepening relationships between medicine and deafness. The social model understands deafness and hearing impairment as the reflections of social understandings of what it means to be deaf with regard to barriers in daily life activities. Bilingual, deaf culture, and linguistic minority are examples of terms used by this model. The political model views disability as an advocacy and policy issue and is seen through the power division between the majority hearing and minority deaf society. Deaf people experiences with oppression and discrimination are reflected in a rich body of literature on history, culture, and language, such as in Nora Croce, in Paul Higgins, in Oliver Sacks, and other books, in Harold Lane, and other publications. Deafness and disability share a history of definition and experience within medical, social constructionist, and political emancipatory models. Both deaf and people with disabilities are members of minority and oppressed groups. They have experienced colonization and paternalism as the metaphor of segregation and separation in residential facilities, special schools, group homes, shelter workshops, vocational rehabilitation, and therapy settings. There is similar vocabulary and language development and recognition of the disabled culture and deaf culture. They both have shared experiences of disabling society. Bogdan and Biklan talked about handicapism, and Lane talked about autism. So both these terms are similar, handicapism and autism. Deaf people do not want to be disabled. When they talk about doctors and audiologists and people in medical professions, they call them the troubled persons industries. So there's a quote by Harold Lane, again, a famous person and an advocate of deaf people, and he said, "The troubled persons industries construct the deaf person as disabled. First, medical professions by diagnosing and assigning hearing aids or cochlear implants, then special educators, then welfare bureaucracies. When I had students of audiology reading Harlan Lane and reading this quote, they would always get really upset because he called them the troubled persons industries, and they felt that they are doing their jobs and trying to help people. But you have to realize that not everyone who is deaf wants to be cured and fixed. Both disability and deafness are handicaps only under certain social conditions. Both deaf and disabled people experience barriers to learning about their cultures. So, can you think of what barriers? Why is it so? What social conditions they would be handicaps under? And I'm just gonna give you hints, since deafness is a linguistic disability, or some people consider themselves to be a language minority. What do you think are the barriers for them? Deaf people have many identities, as many as fingers on one hand, and here's a beautiful picture illustrating this sentence, this thought. Deaf people don't want to be considered disabled. They say, we wish for the recognition of our right to exist as a linguistic minority group. Labeling us as disabled demonstrates a failure to understand that we are non-disabled in any way within our own community. What happened to me when I started to learn sign language, having deaf grandparents, and I came to a deaf club with my grandmother, I was the only person who couldn't really sign there properly, and I felt so out of the place and so excluded, while everyone else was chatting away and laughing loud and being super loud and communicating, and I felt so lost and so helpless. So people who are deaf are only disabled under some conditions, and you probably know by now what conditions they are. The deaf people think of themselves as a linguistic minority like Latinos or Asians. They claim they have nothing in common with amputees, paraplegics, or people with mental retardation. Chubek, who you are reading this week, paralleled the deaf world to Harry Potter's wizard world. Most adults in the child's immediate social world are from an alien hearing culture, parents included. They do not share the same culture, language, friends, school experiences, and so on. For the deaf, mainstreaming is seen as cultural genocide, since residential schools are the breeding ground of deaf culture. And here's another quote by Lane. Deaf people oppose the medicalization of deafness and disability and challenge the persuasive infirmity model based on special education or wearing of technological stigmata such as electronic devices. Foster compares the deaf with the disabled community and lists a number of differences between deafness and disability. Culturally deaf persons constitute a linguistic minority rather than a disability group, as we have heard about it already. There's different interpretation of public law in terms of inclusive education. Culturally deaf people have interpreted integration into mainstream schools as a form of cultural genocide, as schools for the deaf have been the incubators for and transmitters of deaf culture. Preferred ways of naming are deaf people and not people who are deaf, which would be the equivalent of people with disabilities. The importance of place for deaf people having a shared place in terms of residential schools, deaf clubs, or Goddard University really matters. Most people with disabilities are not deaf, and in the disability field, there had been a greater correlation drawn between cultural consciousness and political action, whereas a lot of deaf organizations focus on creating opportunities for social interaction and fellowship of their members rather than political action. Deaf people might be really treated as foreigners. This universalizing view, according to which most people have some disability at least some of the time, is strikingly at odds with the deaf world. Small, tightly-knit, with its own language and culture, sharply demarcated from the rest of society. There's no slippery slope between deaf and hearing. Deaf people are foreigners, wrote an early president of the National Association of the Deaf, living among a people whose language they can never learn. If you ask deaf parents if they want to have a deaf or hearing child, they say that they want for their child to be healthy. It does not matter that he or she is deaf. When you ask about their disability, deaf people tend to say being blind is so much worse, or being on a wheelchair is worse, and so on. They just don't think that being deaf is bad. And here's a little celebration when the baby failed a hearing test, and both the parents and the child are celebrating and doing high fives because they're super happy that their child is deaf. And that's how you preserve the culture. People who are deaf are different from the rest of people with disabilities. Where people with disabilities cherish independence, culturally deaf people cherish interdependence. People with disabilities may gather for political action. Deaf people traditionally gather primarily for socializing. Deaf people marry other deaf people 90% of the time in the US. To be deaf really is an identity for most people. Unless you are talking about people who are older and who turn deaf because of their age. And here's another famous quote that says, deaf people can do anything that hearing people can do, except hear. And at the very end, I would like to share this nice picture of monkeys, and it is titled Deaf, Blind, and Dumb. One is covering its ears, one is covering eyes, and one is covering mouth. Called Deaf, Blind, and Dumb.